The sky over Bavaria was the color of old iron that morning, April 17, 1945. Low clouds pressed down on the pine forests like a gray lid, and the air smelled of smoke from burning towns to the west. The war was dying, but it was taking Germany with it. Oberleutnant Klaus Brenner pulled his leather gloves tighter and scanned the horizon from the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190D9. The Dora sat on a muddy airstrip carved into the forest near Landsberg, her BMW 801 engine ticking and cooling after the pre-flight check. The fuselage was bare metal now. No paint, no markings except a small white 7 on the tail. There was no fuel for luxuries like camouflage anymore. Brenner was 24 years old. He looked 40. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his hands had a permanent tremor from exhaustion and malnutrition. He'd flown 387 combat missions since 1942. Most of his friends were dead. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of itself. Fuel was rationed to drops, ammunition was scarce, and every mission felt like a coin flip with death. His wingman, Lieutenant Hans Dietrich, stood beside his own FW 190 20 meters away. Dietrich was 19, pale, and terrified. He'd been flying combat for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Brenner remembered when new pilots lasted months, not days. The briefing had been short. American bombers, B-17s or B-24s, they weren't sure, were approaching from the northwest, heading toward Munich. The 2 Focke-Wulfs were all that could be scrambled. 2 fighters. Against hundreds of bombers and their escort fighters. "Stay on my wing," Brenner had told Dietrich before they walked to the planes. "Don't chase kills. 1 pass, then we're gone. Verstanden." Dietrich had nodded, but his eyes were vacant with fear. Now Brenner settled into the cockpit, feeling the worn leather seat mold to his body. The Dora was a beautiful machine, longer nose than the standard FW 190, inline engine instead of radial, faster and deadlier at altitude. But she was also old, patched, and running on fuel so poor it left black residue on the exhaust ports. The ground crew, 2 mechanics, both over 50, stood clear. One raised his hand. Brenner pushed the throttle forward, and the BMW 801 roared to life, coughing black smoke before settling into a rough growl. The airframe vibrated. He could feel every bolt, every rivet, every stressed joint. This plane had been through hell. Dietrich's engine started 30 seconds later, sputtering twice before catching. Not good. Brenner taxied forward, feeling the mud grab at the landing gear. The strip was a mess, cratered by American fighter bombers 2 days ago, hastily filled with dirt and logs. One wrong move and the gear would snap. He advanced the throttle, feeling the tail lift, feeling the Dora accelerate, feeling the moment when the wheels left the ground and the world dropped away. Dietrich followed 10 seconds behind, wobbling slightly as he climbed. They turned northwest, climbing through the cloud layer at 2,000 meters. The world went white and blind for 30 seconds, then they broke through into clear sky. The sunlight was harsh and unforgiving. Brenner checked his instruments. Fuel, half tanks. Ammunition, 250 rounds of 20 mm for the nose cannons, 140 rounds per gun for the wing-mounted MG 151s. Enough for 1 good pass, maybe 2 if he was disciplined. The radio crackled. Ground control, distant and broken. Adler 1, contact, 30 kilometers, Angels 20, many bandits. Viel Glück. Good luck. Brenner didn't respond. He checked his mirror. Dietrich was there, 50 meters back, holding formation. The boy was trying. That counted for something. At 6,000 meters, Brenner saw them. The bomber stream was massive, a dark smudge on the northwest horizon, crawling east like a mechanical plague. B-17 flying fortresses, maybe 60 of them, stacked in tight combat boxes. And around them, glinting in the sunlight like silver wasps, were the escorts. P-51 Mustangs. Dozens of them. Brenner's chest tightened. His mouth went dry. He'd fought Mustangs before. They were faster, more maneuverable, and flown by pilots who had fuel to train, fuel to practice, fuel to learn. The Dora could match them in a dive, maybe outturn them at low altitude, but up here, in the thin air at 6,000 meters, the advantage was theirs. He keyed his radio. "Dietrich, one pass on the bombers. Aim for the engines. Then dive west and run for the deck. Do not engage the fighters. Verstanden." A pause. Then Dietrich's voice cracking. "Verstanden, Herr Oberleutnant." Brenner nosed the Dora over, building speed. The bomber formation grew larger, closer. He could see the sunlight flashing off plexiglass turrets, the black smoke trails from hundreds of engines. The sound of his own breathing filled the cockpit, short, sharp, controlled. This was it. One more roll of the dice. He armed his guns, feeling the click of the switches under his thumb. The red lights glowed on the panel. Ready. The Mustangs hadn't seen them yet. They were flying lazy circles above and ahead of the bombers, confident, unconcerned. Why wouldn't they be? The Luftwaffe was finished. Brenner adjusted his grip on the stick, feeling the Dora respond, feeling the speed build, 550 kilometers per hour, 600, 650. The airframe shuddered. The engine screamed. He picked his target, AB-17 on the right edge of the formation, slightly lower than the others. Straggler. Wounded, maybe. He'd aim for the number 3 engine, the one on the right inboard. Kill that, and the bomber might drop out of formation. Might go down. Closer. Closer. The bomber gunners saw him now. Tracers arced out, slow, lazy streams of red and white, curving through the air like fireworks. They looked harmless from this distance. They weren't. Brenner ignored them. He centered the gun sight on the B-17's engine cowling, waited for the range to close, 800 meters, 700, 600, and pressed the trigger. The Dora shook as the nose cannons and wing guns fired in a single, devastating burst. The sound was a teeth-rattling roar. Shells streamed out, walking across the bomber's wing, chewing into the engine. Pieces flew off, cowling panels, propeller blade tips, a gout of flame. Brenner hauled back on the stick, pulling up and away, feeling the G-forces slam him into the seat. The world grayed at the edges. The bomber fell away beneath him, trailing black smoke. And then the Mustangs were on him. The first burst came from above and behind, a rippling stutter of .50 caliber machine guns that sounded like tearing canvas. Brenner saw the tracers flash past his left wing, impossibly fast, and jerked the stick hard right. The Dora rolled, fell into a steep diving turn, engine howling. A P-51 Mustang flashed past overhead, close enough that Brenner saw the pilot's helmet and the white star on the fuselage. The American was already banking hard, turning to follow. Another Mustang was coming in from the left, lower, trying to cut him off. Brenner shoved the throttle to the firewall and dove. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 5,500 meters, 5,000, 4,500. The Dora accelerated like a falling stone, faster than the Mustangs could follow in the initial dive. The airframe groaned, the engine screamed, and the controls stiffened as the airspeed climbed past 700 kilometers per hour. Too fast. The plane was shaking itself apart. He eased back on the stick, pulling out of the dive at 3,000 meters. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. 6 Gs, maybe 7. His vision tunneled. His arms felt like lead. But the Dora held together. He looked back. The 2 Mustangs were following, but they'd fallen behind by maybe 400 meters. He'd bought himself 10 seconds. Maybe. Brenner leveled out at 2,500 meters and turned hard west, toward the cloud layer. If he could reach the clouds, he could lose them. The Mustangs were faster in level flight, but down here, at low altitude, the Dora could turn tighter. The radio crackled. Dietrich's voice panicked. Adler 1. They're on me. I can't. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Brenner didn't look back. He couldn't. There was nothing he could do for the boy now. The first Mustang opened fire again, a long, sustained burst that walked across the sky behind the Dora. Brenner felt the impacts before he heard them, sharp, metallic cracks as shells punched through the tail section. The plane shuddered. The rudder pedals went mushy. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. The oil pressure gauge flickered. The temperature needle climbed into the red. Brenner yanked the stick left, throwing the Dora into a hard brake turn. The Mustang overshot, flashing past his right wing in a blur of polished aluminum. The second Mustang was closer now, lining up for a shot. He rolled right, pulled up, rolled inverted, and dove again. The horizon spun. The engine coughed once, twice, then caught again. The temperature needle was buried in the red now. The oil pressure was dropping fast. The second Mustang fired, a short, disciplined burst. Shells slammed into the Dora's left wing, punching through the thin metal skin. Brenner felt the plane lurch to the right. The left aileron was damaged. The wing was shredding. He fought the controls, wrestling the Dora level. The stick felt wrong, heavy, unresponsive. The plane wanted to roll right. He had to hold constant left pressure just to keep the wings level. Behind him, the two Mustangs were closing in for the kill. They knew he was wounded. They were patient now, methodical. No need to rush. He was a dead man. They just had to wait for him to fall. But the Dora didn't fall. Brenner leveled out at 1,200 meters, just above the cloud tops. The engine was screaming, overheating, losing oil, running on borrowed time. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The airframe rattled and groaned. Every instinct told him to bail out, to pull the canopy release and jump before the plane disintegrated. But something in him refused. Not yet. He looked at the fuel gauge. Quarter tank. Maybe enough. He looked at the compass. West. Toward friendly lines. Toward home. He shoved the throttle forward again, coaxing more speed from the dying engine. The Dora responded, sluggishly, painfully, but she responded. 480 kilometers per hour. The left wing was bent slightly upward now, the aileron torn and fluttering. The rudder was barely functional. But she was still flying. The Mustangs closed to 200 meters. The lead pilot lined up for another burst. Brenner waited until the last possible second, then chopped the throttle and popped the flaps. The Dora decelerated violently. 450 kilometers per hour, 400, 350. The lead Mustang, caught off guard, overshot again, rocketing past overhead. The second Mustang tried to compensate, pulling up and rolling right to avoid a collision. For 3 seconds, Brenner was clear. He retracted the flaps, shoved the throttle forward, and turned hard left, diving into the cloud layer. The world went white. Visibility dropped to 0. He was flying blind, trusting his instruments, feeling the plane shudder and groan around him. 10 seconds in the clouds. 20. 30. He broke out below the cloud layer at 800 meters, over a dense forest. The Mustangs were gone, still circling above the clouds, searching for him. He'd bought himself maybe 2 minutes. The engine was dying. The temperature gauge had stopped working entirely, the needle pegged beyond maximum. Oil streaked the windscreen, thick and black. The prop was running rough, misfiring every few seconds. The left wing was shredded, fabric peeling back from the control surfaces. Brenner scanned the ground. Forest. More forest. A small village to the south, already burning. No airfields. No roads wide enough to land on. The engine coughed again, harder this time. The whole plane lurched. The prop windmilled for 2 seconds, then caught again. It wouldn't last much longer. He had to put her down. No. Ahead, through the trees, he saw a break in the forest, a long, narrow meadow, maybe 600 meters long. Too short for a normal landing, but he had no choice. Brenner lowered the landing gear. The right wheel extended smoothly. The left wheel stuck halfway, the hydraulics damaged. He pumped the emergency extension lever. Once, twice, 3 times. The left gear groaned and locked into place. Maybe. He couldn't be sure. The meadow rushed toward him. Too fast. He was too fast. He chopped the throttle completely, letting the plane fall, bleeding off speed. 300 kilometers per hour. 250. 200. The trees at the edge of the meadow loomed, tall pines, 60 feet high, solid as walls. Brenner pulled back on the stick, flaring at the last second. The Dora's tail dropped, the nose came up, and the wheels hit the ground. The right wheel touched first, bounced once, then slammed down hard. The left wheel hit a half-second later, and collapsed. The Dora's left wingtip caught the ground like an anchor dragging through mud. Metal screamed. The plane slewed hard left, spinning, the tail whipping around. Brenner was thrown against his harness, the straps cutting into his shoulders. The canopy shattered as something, a rock, a piece of gear, punched through the plexiglass. The world became a blur of motion and noise. The engine mount tore free with a metallic shriek. The propeller blades dug into the earth and exploded into fragments. The fuselage buckled. The left wing folded back, crumpling like wet cardboard. Brenner's head snapped forward, cracking against the gun sight. Blood filled his mouth. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The harness was crushing his chest. The Dora spun 180 degrees, carving a trench through the meadow, and slammed into a pile of stones at the far end. The impact was a single massive blow that drove every molecule of air from Brenner's lungs. His vision went black. Then, silence. 4-5 seconds, nothing. The world was still. Quiet. Peaceful. Then the fire started. It began in the engine compartment, a small flicker of orange, almost harmless, feeding on spilled oil and leaking fuel. But within seconds, it spread. The engine cowling was gone. The fuel lines were ruptured. The fire found the main tank, still a quarter full, and roared to life. Flames engulfed the front half of the cockpit. Brenner came to with a gasp, choking on smoke. Heat washed over him, unbearable, searing. The cockpit was filling with smoke, thick and black, and he couldn't see anything except the orange glow of the fire crawling toward him. He fumbled for the harness release, fingers numb and clumsy. His hands were shaking. The release was stuck, jammed, or bent, or he was just too disoriented to work it. The fire was closer now, licking at the instrument panel, melting the rubber seals on the gauges. He yanked harder on the release. Nothing. The heat was suffocating. His flight suit was smoking. His gloves were starting to blister. He could smell his own hair burning. Panic surged through him, raw, primal, animal. He was going to burn alive in this cockpit. He grabbed the emergency knife from the scabbard on his belt and slashed at the harness straps. The blade was dull, the straps were thick, and his hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the knife. He sawed frantically, feeling the heat intensify, feeling the fire creeping closer. The first strap parted. Then the second. He shoved himself up, pushing against the canopy frame. It was jammed, bent from the impact. He braced his boots against the seat and pushed with his legs, throwing his whole body weight against it. The canopy groaned, shifted, and popped free. Brenner tumbled out of the cockpit, falling onto the wing, rolling off the edge and hitting the ground hard. He crawled away from the plane on his hands and knees, choking, coughing, his lungs burning from the smoke. He made it 20 meters before the fuel tank exploded. The blast was a physical force, a wall of heat and pressure that picked him up and threw him forward. He hit the ground face first, arms over his head, as burning debris rained down around him. A piece of the canopy landed 5 feet to his left. A section of the tail landed 10 feet to his right. The main fuselage was a pillar of flame, black smoke pouring into the sky. Brenner lay there, gasping, feeling the heat on his back, feeling the grass beneath his hands, feeling his heart hammering in his chest. He was alive. The Focke-Wulf 190D9, tail number 7, the plane that had carried him through 388 combat missions, the plane that had been shot to pieces, that had lost half its tail and most of its wing, that had flown with a dying engine and no hydraulics, that had refused to crash even when physics said it should, was gone. But he was alive. Brenner pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His legs were shaking. His vision was blurred. Blood ran down his face from a gash on his forehead. His flight suit was scorched and torn. But he could stand. He looked at the burning wreck. The fire was so intense now that he couldn't get within 30 meters. The heat shimmered in the air. The metal frame glowed orange, then white, collapsing in on itself. A part of him wanted to mourn the plane. She'd saved his life. She'd brought him home when she should have fallen apart over enemy territory. She'd defied every law of aerodynamics and engineering by staying in the air. But there was no time for mourning. He heard engines, faint at first, then louder. Aircraft engines. Coming from the north. The Mustangs. They'd found him. Brenner stumbled toward the tree line, moving as fast as his battered body would allow. The forest was thick, pine and underbrush, dark and tangled. He pushed through, branches tearing at his face, roots catching his boots. Behind him, the Mustangs roared overhead, 2 of them, circling the burning Focke-Wulf. He heard them clearly even through the trees, the deep, powerful roar of their Merlin engines, the sound of victory. One of them waggled its wings as it passed over the wreck. A salute. Respect from one pilot to another. Brenner kept moving. West. Always west. He didn't stop until the sound of the engines faded completely, until the smoke from the wreck was just a smudge on the horizon behind him, until his legs gave out and he collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, blood and sweat and ash covering his face. He was alive. The Dora was gone, but he was alive. Brenner walked for 3 days. The first day, he moved west through the forest, following the sun, avoiding roads and villages. He heard vehicles in the distance, American jeeps and trucks, moving east toward the collapsing front lines. He heard artillery fire to the south, German 88s, still fighting, still holding. But he avoided everything and everyone. His flight suit was burned and torn. His face was bruised and cut. He had no food, no water, no map. But he walked. On the second day, he reached a stream and drank until his stomach cramped. He washed the blood and ash from his face, watching the water turn pink and then clear again. His reflection stared back at him from the surface, a hollow-eyed ghost, a man who looked 60 years old. He found a barn that night and slept in the hayloft. The farmer, an old man with one arm, brought him bread and milk without asking questions. Brenner ate in silence, nodded his thanks, and left before dawn. On the third day, he reached a small Luftwaffe field west of Augsburg. It was abandoned, the runways cratered, the hangars burned, the control tower collapsed. But there were still a few people there. Ground crew, mechanics, a handful of wounded pilots waiting for transport that would never come. One of them recognized Brenner. Hauptmann Weber, an old friend from the Polish campaign in 1939. Weber had lost his left leg below the knee. He sat on an overturned fuel drum, smoking a cigarette down to the filter. "Klaus," Weber said, shaking his head. "I heard you went down." "I did," Brenner said. "But you walked out. The plane wouldn't let me die." Weber laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The Focke-Wulf. Always stubborn." Brenner sat down beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. There was nothing left to say. The war was over. Everyone knew it. The Americans were 50 kilometers east. The Russians were at the Oder River. Berlin was surrounded. Hitler was hiding in a bunker. The Luftwaffe was finished. What happened to Dietrich? Weber asked finally. Brenner shook his head. The Mustangs got him. Weber nodded. He'd expected that. They all had. 3 weeks, Brenner said quietly. The kid lasted 3 weeks. More than most, Weber said. They sat in silence, watching the smoke rise from the burning cities to the east. Somewhere in the distance, an air raid siren wailed, a lonely, pointless sound. There was nothing left to protect. Brenner closed his eyes and saw the Focke-Wulf again, the way she'd looked that morning, bare metal and battered, patched and scarred, but still beautiful. He saw the way she'd shuddered when the Mustang's shells tore through her. He saw the way she'd kept flying, refusing to fall, refusing to quit. He thought about all the planes he'd flown, all the missions, all the friends who hadn't come back. He thought about the boys like Dietrich, sent up with 3 weeks of training to die in machines held together with hope and desperation. And he thought about the Dora, tail number 7, and how she'd carried him home one last time. "She saved my life," Brenner said. Weber looked at him. The plane. She should have crashed. The engine was dead. The wing was gone. The tail was shot to hell. But she kept flying. Even when I landed, even when she was on fire, she gave me time to get out. Weber nodded slowly. I've seen it before. Sometimes they just don't want to let go. Brenner opened his eyes and looked at the ruined airfield, at the burned hangars and the cratered runways, at the graveyard of a once great air force. She refused to crash, he said quietly. Even at the end, she refused. Weber stubbed out his cigarette. Maybe she knew you still had something to live for. Maybe. Klaus Brenner survived the war. He surrendered to American forces on April 25, 1945, 8 days after the Meadow crash. He spent 14 months in a POW camp in France, then returned to Germany in 1946. He never flew again. The wreckage of Focke-Wulf 190D-9, tail number 7, was found by a farmer in May 1945. The engine was recovered and sent to a British technical evaluation team. The metallurgists were astonished. The engine had sustained catastrophic damage but had continued running for nearly 15 minutes past the point of theoretical failure. They couldn't explain it. The airframe was too damaged to salvage. It was buried near the crash site. Lieutenant Hans Dietrich's body was recovered in June 1945. He'd managed to bail out after his Focke-Wulf was hit, but his parachute failed to open. He was 19 years old. He'd been flying combat for 3 weeks. In 1987, Klaus Brenner returned to the Meadow in Bavaria. He was 66 years old. The crash site had long since been reclaimed by the forest, the scars healed over by grass and wildflowers. There was no marker, no memorial. Just trees and silence. He stood there for a long time, remembering the sound of the engine, the feel of the controls, the heat of the fire. He remembered the way the Dora had shuddered when the shells hit her, the way she'd kept flying. "Thank you," he said quietly. The wind rustled through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. Brenner closed his eyes and felt, for just a moment, the weight of the stick in his hand, the vibration of the engine through the airframe, the sensation of flight. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the forest and the ghosts behind. The Focke-Wulf 190D-9 was one of the finest fighters of World War II, fast, rugged, and deadly. But in the final months of the war, skill and engineering couldn't overcome fuel shortages, overwhelming numbers, and the exhaustion of pilots pushed beyond their limits. Klaus Brenner flew 388 combat missions. He survived them all. The plane that brought him home on his last mission, battered, burning, and broken, refused to crash until her pilot was safe. Some called it luck. Some called it engineering. Brenner called it loyalty. And perhaps, in the end, that's the truest answer.